Hello Funkers, Tony Funk here, back at it again in yet another Tony Funkumentary. In today's episode, we will be disseminating the Seinen Manga Jagan, or Jagan. Let's just go with Jagan for now, and taking a stab at what this fucked up manga is trying to tell us about the inherent dysfunction of a politeness-based society, the importance of chaos, and the power of desire. Now, before I start hitting you over the head with Psychology Today articles, the first part is going to spoil Jagan for those of you who haven't already read it and don't have that kind of time. I mean, this manga is 163 chapters, so I totally understand you not going to read 163 chapters just to see my video, although I would be honored if you were to do that. Now, the following parts of this 3-part series will delve into the philosophies being explored and will reference many of the events in this video. If you've already read Jagan, then you can skip part 1 and proceed to parts 2 and 3. Alrighty then, without further ado, let's talk about Jagan. So before I even go into the synopsis of, the story of Jagan, let me just kind of explain a little bit of etymology here, because I'm going to be glancing over this main character's transformation, and there's a little bit of nuance as to why his name is Jagan. So let's just start off by defining Jagan. Jagan, according to UrbanDictionary.com, is a Japanese term loosely translated as evil eye. It gives its wielders the powers of telepathy, telekinesis, an easier time learning swordsmanship, godlike speed, and certain attacks. Now, a lot of these powers do not actually correspond to the main character in the story. However, Jagan seems to be kind of like a very common trope in anime, like in shonen anime or in seinen anime and mangas and that kind of stuff. It's just a very catch-all term for a lot of the powers that some characters have, particularly demons. Now, in the case of Jagan, that is sort of the case, except I believe that the main character, Shintaro Jagasaki, becomes Jagan and becomes known as Jagan because of the eyepiece that you guys can see right here. The eyepiece that kind of comes over his eye, which is kind of like a Terminator eye sort of thing, where he can kind of see stats in real time with his eye and kind of use his eye as a scope. Now, that's my personal theory as to why he is referred to as Jagan and why his right arm is referred to Jagan as well. Now, you're probably still very confused. No worries. Let's just go right into it. Jagan centers around Shintaro Jagasaki, a budding cop in his late 20s who seems to be the worst communicator of all time. I mean, I couldn't go more than 2 chapters deep into this manga without having to scream at the manga panels for presenting me with the most pussyfooting protagonist of all time. This fucking guy is literally the definition of every nice guy, in quotations, on internet forums and can never seem to say what's on his mind. So anyway, Shintaro goes about his day doing exciting Japanese cop quests, like asking drunk hoodlums to quiet down and get berated for his fake smile. We learn, however, that Shintaro has an underlying desire to commit murder against the civilians who give him grief, which ultimately makes us appreciate his fake smile a lot more. Thank God Shintaro isn't American, otherwise he'd probably have a grocery list of victims and paid leaves under his belt, if you know what I'm saying. Shintaro's inability to be stern, however, seems to be one of his better qualities when compared to how he deals with his complete sham of a relationship with girlfriend Yuriko. Yuriko, we learn, is a kind-hearted woman with a desire to take her relationship to the next level with Shintaro and introduce him to her parents. Something Shintaro is uncomfortable with, but for whatever reason, doesn't have the balls to tell her. Well, we immediately find out what that reason is, when Shintaro gets some good old Yuriko pussy. I mean, how could you want to disappoint a girl like that, am I right? Okay, all jokes aside, we continue to see glimpses of just how completely disingenuous and manipulative Shintaro is when he is seen interacting with his workmates, always fake smiling and the like. His co-worker, Belle, is able to figure out when Shintaro is being genuine and when he's trying to keep up his charade of the happy-go-lucky cop. It isn't until a freak and narrative-defining incident where we see why Shintaro has to hide behind a charade of being a nice and emotionally intelligent dude. While in the tube, or the metro, whatever the fuck you want to call it, We see Shintaro experience a landmark incident where a white-collar boss man begins to berate and belittle his subordinate salaryman before Shintaro asks him to quiet down. This is the Japanese metro after all, you do have to keep quiet. The boss man, however, becomes even more aggressive and starts to yell at Shintaro, explaining that he won't listen to a cop because he earns more money than him. In an unexpected turn of events, this executive turns into a monster and murks his employee by chopping him into squares. Shintaro and his partner grab their guns to stop the monster. Shintaro, of course, eager to finally shoot somebody, for fuck's sakes. When his partner is clipped by the monster's tongue, decapitating him, and Shintaro's 2 fingers are cut off, Shintaro's triggered to act aggressively and unwittingly shoots the monster from a gun that materialized out of his right arm, much to his and everyone's surprise. Now, if this turn of events seems a bit odd, it's because it is. These types of things don't just happen. There's an entire 163 chapters and 14 volumes that explains this phenomenon, but luckily for you, I will explain it in no more than a minute, or maybe a little bit more, we'll see. In the Jagan universe, there is an unnamed event where magical frogs descend from the sky, specifically into the fictional borough of Tokyo called Bupa City. These frogs, referred to as frenzied frogs, have the desire to bond with humans in lifelong unions, which ultimately alter their hosts permanently according to their desires. As evidenced with the rich executive in the metro, his desires were recognition for being in a position of power and recognition for his wealth. Because frenzied frogs play on these desires, they are able to exacerbate these feelings to extremes. And when the host is completely consumed by this desire, the host loses their humanity and enters the state of consciousness of a fractured human. Fractured humans can no longer regain their human consciousness and undergo a rapid transformation where they gain powerful abilities, albeit unable to control them. Makes sense so far, right? Good. Now, evidently the frogs that appeared in Bupa City appeared in different developmental stages. Adult frogs have the power to consume their hosts completely and permanently, whereas tadpole frogs and froglets have the power to cause temporary transformations whenever the host expresses their innermost desires. Tadpoles, thus, being unable to turn humans into full fractured humans, can allow their host to retain their reason, given that their desires do not consume them completely. These types of hosts are therefore referred to as half-fractured humans because they are half human and half monster. This gives us a diverse universe of both brutish monsters and superhero/supervillain type characters. But that's not all, folks. The need for exposition in such a complex and nuanced premise requires us someone to explain what the fuck is going on. Luckily for us, author Kaneshiro Muneyuki has given us guides for understanding the nature of the frenzied frog phenomenon. Enter the partners. Partners are a vast variety of anthropomorphic birds. They're all different species and they're all kind of different, goofy in their own ways. But they help half-fractured humans understand their powers and limitations. They also seem to be unaware of their own origins, but fortunately they know the ins and outs of keeping their half-fractured human counterparts alive. The reason for that is because if their half-fractured human counterparts die, the partner dies. Partners appear whenever a frenzied tadpole bonds with a human and die whenever that half-fractured human goes full retard, aka fully fractured as well. Because of this, it is imperative that every half-fractured human's partner keeps them alive and fully in control of their desires. The way they do this is by coaxing their human partners to kill fractured humans in order to extract the frenzied frog from inside their dead host. Once extracted, the partner will eat the frenzied frog and defecate a dung ball, I'm not even kidding, which can be snorted by their half-fractured counterpart in order to prevent them from going full fractured mode. Okay, so now we can see why it is in every half-fractured human's interest to kill fully fractured humans. Killing them is a means of self-preservation to prevent themselves from being lost in the sauce, so to speak. Now, there is one last bit of lore that every partner discloses to their half-fractured human counterparts, and that's that should every single fractured human die, then their half-fractured human can choose to revive anyone who has died as a fractured human in exchange for their own life. Okay, there's the Jagan universe for you. There's the crash course. Confused yet? I don't blame you. This premise is whack, kind of forced, convoluted, and just doesn't make any sense. But believe me, it makes for some really interesting ethical dilemmas, philosophical questions, and psychological case studies, let me tell you. And we'll go into that in a bit in the next 2 parts. Now, for this part, now that we have the premise established, let's follow our protagonist, Shintaro, around and find out which watershed moments established his motivations for killing every last fractured human in Bupa City. Well, for starters, in Chapter 2, Shintaro's girlfriend Yuriko becomes a fractured human while explaining her anxiety caused by her biological clock to have kids ASAP. The frenzied frog that enters her body plays upon her desire for marriage and a domestic life and transforms her into his scorpion, a portmanteau of the words hysteria and scorpion. Her overwhelming desire causes her to threaten Shintaro's life, and Shintaro is forced to defend himself, using his arm weapon known as Jagan. He kills his girlfriend and, devastated of course, vows to do whatever it takes to revive her, even at the cost of his own life. This thus kicking off Shintaro's long and arduous journey to make things right. Shintaro, unable to come to grips with Yuriko's death, stores her head in his freezer like a fucking serial killer. Now, from this point on, we will only refer to Shintaro as Jagan, as he and his weapon become synonymous throughout the story, with other characters even referring to Shintaro as Jagan. So we'll just do the same and keep with that tradition. Jagan decides to keep his identity as a half-fractured human private throughout the story from here on out, and has a few encounters with additional fractured humans. While attending a wedding in Chapter 5, he meets an awkward and reserved character named Robo-chan, who had attended school with him in the past. During this wedding, the bride becomes a fractured human and attacks everyone in attendance. During this fight, Jagan realizes that he is not only capable of transforming his arm into a gun, but he's also capable of transforming his arm into different types of weapons if he needs them. In this particular case, he turns his arm into a sniper, given that he is fueled with his desire to kill someone. His desire becomes so overpowering, however, that he starts to transform into a fractured human and has his owl partner Doku produce a dung ball from the frenzied frog he collected from the bride. We get an interlaced story about Robo-chan after that, the guy Jagan met at the wedding, where we get a detailed view into his number one hobby, stalking girls so that he could set up cameras in their room and watch them fuck their boyfriends. Yeah, I'm not making this up. I think I'm going to be saying that a lot throughout this video. Anyway, we'll talk more about Robo-chan a bit later. But for now, based on this information that I've given you about him, you can probably take a guess at what his desire is and what kind of a power he's going to get should he maybe turn into a half-fractured human. I don't know, we'll see if that happens. Later in the story, Jagan meets the first half-fractured human like himself, named Chiharu Matsuyomachi, and his partner. Chiharu, aka Tree Guy, has some extremely powerful fucking abilities, such as materializing tree roots out of his body, making trees and plants, and creating poisons from flowers. However, his abilities are the least fascinating facet about Chaharu. We learn that Chaharu also dedicates his life to killing fractured humans, but for completely different reasons to Jagan. Chaharu's desire is a need for interesting things to happen, finding the monotony of everyday life to be pointless and finding people who do not pursue their desires to be boring. He considers himself a selfish supremacist, and upon finding out about Jagan's motivations for fighting, his answer being, reviving his dead girlfriend, Chaharu attempts to kill him by letting him rot in a tree that he materialized himself. Jagan escapes, proclaiming that he will die according to his own will in a fit of fury, thus gaining the respect and admiration of Chaharu. After this encounter with Chaharu, the plot kind of ramps up and several things happen. Robo-chan becomes a half-fractured human, capable of using his powers to drug women into liking sex with him. Meanwhile, Jagan, in a parallel plotline, starts to develop feelings with his partner at the police station, Bell, and he becomes a quasi-member of a superhero group of half-fractured humans led by Misogi, a fractured human with the power to become a cyborg and enhance his abilities with machine parts. Misogi develops this group as a means to ensure the safety of the citizens of Bupa City, stating that his desire was a need to provide true justice, a sentiment he had since being a child and into his young adult years, even attending anti-war protests and the like. Misogi's underlings and his superhero group, called the Heiwa Happiness Heroes, or Triple H for short, did not necessarily share his same altruistic desire for justice, and instead were in the group for selfish desires. Misogi, aware of this, did not really mind, as he stated that their individual desires did not matter so long they actually worked together for world peace. Eventually, after several successes, public admiration, and earned funds, Misogi develops a pharmaceutical-grade dung ball that has the same power to suppress fractured human transformations in an attempt to prevent public condemnation of fractured and half-fractured humans. Now, before the generic dung ball, as it's called, goes on the road, politicians attempt to make vigilantism illegal with the Frenzied Frog Countermeasures Bill, which goes in direct opposition to Misogi's ambitions. Now, during a protest against the Frenzied Frog Countermeasures Bill, held outside of the National Assembly building in Bupa City, Triple H and over 4,000 protesters were assaulted by Chiharu and his partner, due to Chiharu not believing Triple H nor the protesters were particularly interesting or following their own selfish desires. Chiharu's partner drops hundreds of frenzied frogs, presumably bred from a frog captured in a jar by Chiharu, into the crowd and ultimately became responsible for the death of over 4,000 people, later known as the mass fracturing event. Because of the large-scale bloodbath that resulted in hundreds of humans fracturing at once, Misogi lost his shit and attempted seppuku in order to restore honor to himself for having been indirectly responsible for such a large-scale tragedy. This causes emotions to go into overdrive, thus fracturing him even more and turning him into a fully fractured human. Remember, if you can't keep your desires under control, you go full fractured. During this event, our little rapist fellow Robo-chan eventually does meet his end alongside Misogi. He does some other stuff that I really don't want to get into, like raping one of the superheroes and getting his dick chopped off. But alas, he meets his end here, okay? So anyway, Misogi goes fully fractured and Jagan is forced to kill him. In the aftermath of this event, one of Triple H's past employees, Maroha, takes over the organization and rebrands it into a company that sells generic dung balls. Yeah, she's got more of an eye for business than Misogi ever did. In another parallel subplot, a loser delivery driver named Yadori wishes to become the protagonist of his own life. Him being unable to get ahead in life and spending most of his life being overlooked and largely unnoticed, desires to have the life of someone popular and generally well-liked. He ultimately gets his wish when, while on delivery, a frenzied tadpole enters his body and he transforms into a shape-shifting octopus, capable of consuming people and becoming them in appearance as well as in psychology. So for example, if he takes over a woman's body, he starts thinking like a woman, and so on and so forth. Ha! Take that, TERFs! He accidentally unleashes his power on a beautiful woman living in a share house named Irie, killing her and transforming into her without knowing much about what he had done. Being tired of living as an unnoticed scrub, he decides to just take up the identity of Irie due to her popularity and begins a new life of being a woman. So Yadori is Irie, and she will play a pivotal role later in the story. Now, because Yadori just basically kind of takes up this personality, we will now be referring to Yadori as Irie for the rest of the story. Jagan later gets recruited by a guy named Mikazuchi within his police unit for special operations called Special Kajin Analysis Team, or SCAT for short, after being identified from footage during his battle with Misogi in Chapter 55. Kajin just means fractured human, I suppose. Anyway, he blackmails Jagan by finding Yuriko's head and promises to arrest him for murder should Jagan refuse to take up his new role at SCAT. Mikazuchi and Jagan later have multiple adventures killing half-fractured humans incognito. Mikazuchi proves to be highly competent in battle as a half-fractured human himself, with the ability to harden his body up to 10 times the hardness of a diamond. He also offers to train Jagan to further his powers, where Jagan reveals during a training session that his ultimate desire is to kill in the name of justice. During Mikazuchi's training session, Mikazuchi reveals that his desire, and the reason he's so powerful, is because he wants to ultimately revive his dead son, who he had to kill himself once his son went full fractured. So pretty similar to Jagan's backstory as well. During his exploits with Mikazuchi, Jagan questions the morality of his actions in killing half-fractured humans who are exacting revenge on their childhood bullies. In this incident, a lawyer named Bando is revealed to have been a bully to 2 troubled kids during their middle school years. Bando's actions caused the paralysis of student Emochi's mother, causing him to later take revenge on his bullies, after he and his friend Kemu were offered froglets by Chiharu. Because of the severity of Bando's past actions causing a ripple effect that eventually destroyed the lives of the 2 former students, Jagan takes pity on these 2 ex-bullied students, despite them being murderers in their series of revenge killings. Bando eventually has his career ruined, however, by having all of his misdeeds ousted as a lawyer, and Jagan carries on with his work despite being highly troubled and having to kill 2 half-fractured humans who endured lifelong torment at the hands of Bando. I mean, think about it. Jagan was forced to kill 2 people whose entire lives were ruined by a son of a bitch named Bando, and Bando gets to go scot-free. Obviously, this causes a huge conflict for Jagan, which ultimately carries on throughout the rest of the manga. Now, the following arc focuses on a more stable world, as the generic dung ball has put a lull to the fractured human epidemic. Taking his chance, Jagan, now in a serious relationship with Belle, decides to take the day off and go on a date with her to a demon-themed park in Bupa City named Deaderland. In a parallel plot thread, shape-shifting Irie also goes to the park with her housemates. During Belle and Jagan's excursion, they compete in multiple contests and ride roller coasters in an attempt to gain enough points to meet the Demon King, the ultimate prize and objective of this theme park, as explained by their demon cosplaying tour guide, Nabingo. Now, I don't know about you guys, but this fucking theme park sounds dope. Like, the whole premise of this theme park is fucking awesome. Now, before they do reach enough points, Jagan receives a phone call from Mikazuchi to undergo an investigation of Deaderland due to a large number of disappearances from Deaderland guests. Jagan agrees to undergo the investigation and realizes that many of the cosplaying demons weren't cosplaying and were in fact half-fractured humans. Once Jagan exposes the half-fractured human named Pino, Belle gets kidnapped, and Jagan is forced to beat Deaderland in order to meet the Demon King and rescue his girlfriend. A lot of other shit happens, like Jagan fights this giant rabbit and other stuff, which really isn't that important to this arc. The other 3 members of Scat show up and assist Jagan in taking down the kingpin of the operation and his minions. During their ensuing fights, they uncover the purpose of Deaderland, exposing the theme park as being an entire vetting process for creating new half-fractured humans, with the froglets being birthed from a giant frog in a vat. Essentially, once the theme park goers gain enough points, they get to meet the Demon King and are interrogated as a way to see whether or not the park goers are half-fractured human material. The main officials of Deaderland are later revealed to be Nabingo, Pino, and another half-fractured human named Noman's Noman. During their battle, Jagan saves Irie's life, thus giving birth to Irie's obsession with Jagan and her goal to meet him at all costs necessary. During Scat and the Deaderland officials' battle, Jagan injures Pino and Mikazuchi defects to Deaderland under the condition that if he joins them, Noman's Noman can revive Mikazuchi's dead son using his half-fractured human power. Mikazuchi's son is revived, and Jagan and the remaining Scat members escape to fight another day. In the process, however, Jagan fights Pino with the intent to kill both himself and Pino by burning both of them to death, considering that Pino's powers are necrosis-based bacteria, and the only way to defeat him is through extreme temperatures or hydrophobic environments. During this battle with Pino, several people die and Jagan gets framed as being the cause of the destruction, thus turning Jagan into a fugitive. Jagan later vows to kill Mikazuchi for defecting and breaks up with Belle as a means to protect her from future bad guys before going into hiding. Deaderland thus continues to function without any more half-fractured humans to stop Nabingo and company. As a result, the population of half-fractured humans explodes throughout Bupa City. We get a time skip where Jagan develops a new technique by creating a remote bomb bullet that can be used as a tracking device and as a means to kill the individual who carries it inside. At this point, Jagan is extremely powerful and can pretty much materialize anything he wants with his biological power. Jagan is later attacked by a half-fractured human named Yukimaru, his ability having cat-like reflexes and claws, who is exacting revenge on Jagan for his indirect involvement in his grandfather's death. Yukimaru is revealed to have acquired his powers from the Deaderland vetting process, in which he received a froglet from Noman's Noman, making him a perfect candidate to infiltrate the facility and destroy it from the inside. Jagan defeats Yukimaru by shooting him with a portable detonating bullet and offers to let him kill him in return for a favor. Jagan, using the threat of a remote detonation, convinces Yukimaru to infiltrate Deaderland and place biological surveillance cameras that Jagan can monitor remotely. Yukimaru obliges, but ultimately gets caught by the guards by being unable to lie his way out of a situation, and engages with multiple Deaderland guards. He easily defeats them, until he is faced with Mikazuchi, who nearly defeats Yukimaru. During this battle, Nabingo appears and reveals himself to actually be Chiharu this whole time. Chiharu voices his complaint that Noman's Noman had lost sight of his original desire to live a life of excitement, and decides to betray Deaderland and assist Yukimaru in the destruction of the giant frog vat by restraining Mikazuchi with his tree powers. Chiharu's betrayal, though unexpected, is revealed to stem with his frustration that Noman's Noman had become boring by pursuing a path of creating a world largely operated by half-fractured humans, in contrast to Yukimaru's hedonistic desire to exact revenge on Jagan. In an unexpected turn of events, Chaharu then decides to join forces with Jagan to stop Pino, Mikazuchi, and the new leader of Deaderland, Noman's Noman. While Jagan and company plan their takedown of Deaderland, Noman's Noman announces his candidacy as mayor of Bupa City, claiming that under him the world would be safe from evil by his personal paramilitary corps called the Black Oni Corps. With this revelation, Team Jagan not only plans to kill Noman, Mikazuchi, and Pino, but also expose Noman for all of his corruption in order to first turn the public opinion against them. We get a pivotal scene where Mikazuchi plays catch with his son, Kamihito, right before one of the big battles. However, we realize that there is a disconnect in the way that Mikazuchi interacts with his son, causing us to suspect damaged family dynamics. Irie, meanwhile, deeply infatuated and indebted with Jagan, decides to start her own personal quest to find and thank Jagan for him having saved her life, using that event as a basis for believing that Jagan was framed as being the bad guy during the debacle, in that entire battle that happened in Deaderland. Her search leads her to a multitude of social media pages, asking about the whereabouts of Jagan, until she stumbles upon a page that claims to be a Jagan informant. She follows the lead to a guy impersonating Jagan in a car park, who uses a somewhat similar appearance to Jagan to take advantage of girls who also have a crush on Jagan, since at this point in the story Jagan is kinda somewhat of a celebrity and is very popular. This fake Jagan leads Irie to his trailer and he ultimately rapes her, threatening to shoot his half-fractured human load and dissolve her with his acidic semen. I'm not making this up. Irie, left with no choice, absorbs fake Jagan with his squid absorption powers and kills him, thus allowing her to have another person's likeness in her shape-shifting arsenal. Right after this happens, Jagan gets blasted through the walls of the car park as he fights Team Dino, a squad composed of dinosaurid half-fractured humans under the Black Oni Corps, aka Noman's Noman elite soldiers. During this battle, Jagan finds himself hiding behind a vehicle in that same car park Irie was in, while planning his next attack. Irie, aware of this, deliberates that in order to settle the score between her and Jagan, she has to distract the dinosaur people and allow Jagan to counterattack. Despite knowing she could die in pulling such a stunt, Irie bravely transforms into her fake Jagan form and jumps in front of the dinosaurs, giving Jagan ample time to fire his biological rockets, killing Team Dino. Jagan, confused, confronts Irie, now transformed back into her female form, and while confronted, she informs Jagan that she can help him. Jagan, intrigued, takes her back to Yukimaru and Chiharu in their new headquarters, where they discuss her being an asset to the team. They deliberate that Irie could be an important asset in their plan to leak documents regarding Noman's corruption and turning public opinion against them by using Irie as a honey trap. With this new development, Team Jagan launches their plan in full motion. During one of Noman's political campaign party events, Chaharu and Jagan prepare their entry into the party to take down Noman's Mikazuchi, and Pino, while Airi infiltrates the party as her attractive self. During one of Noman's speeches, Airi begins to chat up a government official who has dirt on Nomans, flirting with him and getting him horny enough to take her to his penthouse. Meanwhile, Chiharu drops into the venue via a ceiling panel and attacks Nomans, who is immediately protected by Mikazuchi. Jagan fires his sniper round into Noman's head and realizes that he won't be able to kill Noman so easily. A large battle ensues between the four, with Jagan shooting Nomans with a Gatling gun, only to be informed that Nomans had absorbed around 1,000 souls, and in order to fully kill him, Jagan needs to kill Nomans over 1,000 times. This is due to the fact that whenever people wouldn't pass the vetting process in Deaderland, Noman would just absorb them. This ability gives Nomans enough time to escape Jagan's assault via his girlfriend, a fractured human named Mona Linda, who is capable of creating force fields and manipulating gravity. Meanwhile, Yukimaru is seen infiltrating Deaderland and kidnapping Kimihito, Mikazuchi's son. Meanwhile, Jagan continues to pursue Noman and his girlfriend Mona Linda before being intercepted by Pino. Jagan and Pino have another battle where Pino, fueled by revenge for sustaining burns during their first fight, attempts to kill Jagan and gives us a tragic backstory about his love interest committing suicide after being framed for conducting incomplete research on humans and subsequently killing them with flesh-eating bacteria. Pino then manages to touch Jagan during their battle, giving Jagan a limited window of time to kill Pino before himself dying from flesh-eating bacteria wounds. Jagan decides to shoot Pino into the sun using a biological rocket, thus ending him once and for all. While this fight is going on, Airi is tasked to extract incriminating documents using a hacking USB, while she distracts the government official who took her home, so to speak. After being unable to convince the government official to shower separately, she decides to distract him by titty fucking him until completion, while she uses one of her octopus tentacles to hack into his computer. Yeah, like I said, I'm not making this up. This manga is practically a hentai at this point. After the battle, Team Jagan escapes and subsequently leaks all of the incriminating documents regarding Noman, thus ending his political ambitions. Jagan is later healed by ex-Scat and ex-Triple H operative Yumama using her healing powers. Meanwhile, Belle carries on with her daily cop duties, unable to get over Jagan's breakup until she decides that she will never contact him again, despite her grief. Team Jagan have a celebration, and later Jagan interrogates Kimihito, who is now locked up and tied to a chair. Jagan probes Kimihito and realizes that Mikazuchi was largely absent throughout Kimihito's life, choosing to be consumed by his work and only showing up to take care of Kimihito after his mother died. During the short amount of time they did live together, Mikazuchi continued to act distant and did not decide to become a better father until the day Kimihito became a fractured human. Meanwhile, at Deaderland, Noman, defeated and labeled as a criminal, faces his dark future ahead of him, and decides to abandon all ambition and assimilate everyone into himself, thus creating a collective hive of consciousness unable to experience pain. Very similar to human instrumentality if you've ever seen Neon Genesis Evangelion or seen my video on the topic. A little plug there. Mikazuchi then departures Deaderland, promising to bring back Kimihito and Jagan's head as a souvenir for Noman. Meanwhile, back at Jagan Team HQ, Yukimaru falls in love with Airi, and later Chaharu reveals to Airi in private that he knows her true identity and threatens to oust her as Yadori and casts doubt about her loyalty due to her secret identity. With this information, Chaharu blackmails Airi into finding and bringing Belle to Chaharu, due to the fact that Belle could be used as a trigger for making Jagan even more powerful. Airi obliges and goes off to fetch Belle. Later in the story, Jagan, devoid of all meaning to his life after all of the events that had transpired, decides to fetch Yuriko's head from former Scat member Natakai, and while looking at her head decides not to revive her anymore. His reasoning being that he developed a relationship with Belle with the intention to die as soon as he revived Yuriko, thus having a temporary relationship that was meant to give him and Belle a short-lived life of happiness. Since remaining loyal to Yuriko made no sense considering her revival meant Jagan's death, and they could never really live together again, Jagan's relationship with Belle was justified. However, since Jagan broke up with Belle and attempted to kill himself during his battle with Pino, Jagan's existence started to lack any meaning anymore, and based on how Kimehiro's revival only caused him more despair, Jagan concluded that reviving the dead was a curse for those who had to endure it. After his decision to forfeit his original reason to kill all fractured humans, Jagan finally faces Mikazuchi later that day. They have a fierce battle in which Jagan successfully defeats Mikazuchi, but instead of killing him, decides to keep him alive as Kimihito, still tied to the chair and as a spectator of this battle, declares that he hates his dad. Jagan, realizing that living with this knowledge is worse punishment than death, decides to keep Mikazuchi alive and leaves the two of them behind. Soon after Mikazuchi is defeated, Noman's Noman is shown assimilating multiple people, similar to how Agent Smith assimilates the entire Matrix in The Matrix Reloaded. Noman's Noman, using Amazon delivery drivers, begins to assimilate the majority of Bupa City. We later get a flashback of Ren Nojo, Noman's Noman, before he became a fractured human, and find out that he was a child prodigy being able to outcompete all of his peers in athletics, music, and academia, thus hurting everyone's feelings for putting a lot of work into their crafts and still coming in second to Ren. Kinda reminds me of the Cristiano Ronaldo and Messi dynamic. Anyway, because of this, Ren realized that his life was pointless due to his life being devoid of challenges and meaning. So in his later years, after having a celebratory orgy for becoming rich with his stockbroker partners, Ren decides to just jump off the building and commit suicide. Before he is able to hit the ground, however, he turns into a goo and realizes that he had become a half-fractured human right before his death. Chiharu is seen waiting for him at the bottom of the building. Chiharu then asks Ren Nojo what his desire is, and Ren answers behind tears that he wants a kind world, thus piquing Chiharu's interest. As Irie meets Belle and has her offer of going back to Jagan refused, they are attacked by one of Noman's minions and are forced to escape together. At the same time, Jagan brings Yuriko's head to the top of a building and burns it, explaining that because of their differences and what they wanted from each other, Jagan should have broken up with Yuriko and avoided being in a relationship where neither of them were going to be happy. The moment he burns her head, however, Jagan loses his powers due to the fact that he completely relinquishes his desire to revive Yuriko completely and becomes so apathetic to his cause that he no longer has the desire to violently kill bad people. Jagan realizes the severity of the situation when Noman's Noman minions start attacking him. However, he becomes unable to fire his biological weapons. Belle and Irie meet up with Chiharu, where Chiharu explains Belle's role in being able to make Jagan more powerful, acting as his trigger. After Belle refuses to act as his trigger, due to her resentment of Jagan, Chiharu goes on a suicide mission to fight Noman's Noman and leaves, leaving Belle and Irie to escape together into one of the shelters that the military had provided during the Noman's Noman assimilation incident. Belle and Irie become separated as they board different evacuation helicopters. Belle ends up safe in a shelter, whereas Irie and Yukimaru, who saves her life, end up taking refuge in a high-rise. During this event, Chaharu was nearly defeated by Noman's Noman, and Jagan's escape from Noman's minions becomes broadcasted by the news. Mikazuchi watches the broadcast and realizes that Jagan is incapable of fighting back, having lost all of his desire, and decides to escape the shelter and sacrifice his life for Jagan, thus triggering Jagan's powers yet again. Mikazuchi's death became a trigger powerful enough to push Jagan past his limits and give him a revitalized sense of power and desire to kill Noman's Noman. After this, Jagan once again fights Noman's Noman and nearly kills him in his half-fractured state, now precariously close to turning him into a full-fractured human, and thus concluding the 151 chapters that are currently available in English out of the 163 that comprise the complete Jagan manga. Now, to be honest, I don't know how Jagan ends after the events in chapter 151. It's possible that Jagan revives Yuriko anyway, maybe he kills himself fighting Noman's Noman, maybe Chiharu surprises us by switching allegiances yet again, or maybe we just get a happily ever after with Belle, who fucking knows. But 151 chapters was definitely enough background for me to pick apart the themes, lessons, and undertones of Jagan, which I will be discussing in the upcoming 2 parts of this 3-part series. I will be referencing things present in this synopsis, as well as conversations and events that I did not specifically mention in the following videos. However, I will be providing the proper context, so that nobody feels lost in the greater context of this story. Anyway, Funkers, stay tuned for part 2, where we'll examine how Jagan is a criticism of politeness and an exploration of chaos and its importance in our everyday lives. I hope you guys enjoyed this Jagan plot recap, and it was concise and easy to follow. And as always, I will see y'alls down the road.